Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. This is Venerable Tikwang Tree on Dharma Tree. I just want to thank you for joining me today on my newest and latest segment called Ask a Monk, where I'm basically answering questions that I've received by you, whether they were sent to me or someone just randomly asked me or whatever it may be. I'm here to answer those questions. So let's get started. So today's first question is going to be a pretty basic question, actually, but it's a question I get asked often as a monk, and quite often we get requests from students and universities and schools asking to interview us, meaning the monastics, for a school project or whatnot. And one of the common questions we get is, why did you become a monk? And, what are the benefits of being a monastic versus just being a layperson? And the first part of the question, as to why I became a monk, is kind of, I don't know how to exactly answer that. It almost feels like the question of what is Buddhism, right? It's a very open ended question. And even though why I became a monk is a more specific question, as broad, but it's still kind of a weird question to answer sometimes because um, I can't really put words into what I feel like answering, if that makes any sense. But to try to answer the question, um, first I have to kind of go back a little bit in time and really just make note that unless you've know me and known my story, I basically came upon Buddhism almost by accident. I say by accident, but growing up as a kid, I always struggled with religion in general, and for many years, probably between 14 and 20, I really did a lot of soul searching. And I started to study and practice pretty much every world religion except for Buddhism for some apparent reason. But I believe it had been either my second year of college where I took a world religions class, and of course, in Buddhism was one of the subjects. And even prior to class, even when I first started to look into different religions, one of the common things between them all, for the most part, was meditation, right? And meditation, of course, comes in all different shapes, sizes, and forms, and each religion has its own form of of meditation, whether it's through prayer or actual meditation or whatever it may be. So I've been meditating more than I've been a Buddhist. But then when I came to Buddhism, and even though in the class I was reading about it, it still didn't have that click yet, right? I haven't had that aha moment, or that, yes, this is it. This is what it's all about. Um, it was slowly creeping up and it was happening, and the more I read, through the class, the more things kind of made sense, right? Because to me, one of my biggest struggles with religion was just the fact that, why am I listening to some invisible being tell me how to live my life, right? That was my biggest struggle. Is like, who are you? Like, who declared you God, right? Like, if you declare yourself God, then that's very egotistical, right? Anyone can declare themselves God. Does that make them an actual God? And besides that, it's just other things, right? Where it didn't really make sense. And Buddhism did make sense because it's not telling you, hey, this is the correct way to live, right? Of course, we have precepts and we have guidelines, and there's, the different practices and teachings, but they're not rules where you have to live by that are set in stone, right? As if you broke one of those rules, you went to hell or whatever it may be. One of the scare tactics that another religion would do or have. So it kind of just made a little bit more sense, right? It's like, hey, live this life, live by these practices, and if they work for you, great. If they don't, that's also great, right? So there was no kind of set in stone kind of rules in Buddhism for the most part, and so it kind of just a little bit made more sense. And then I remember it was probably a few years later or that same year, the Buddha documentary called Buddha that premiered on PBS came on, and I watched it, and it was at that moment where everything just kind of made so much sense. Everything just clicked. Everything just came into place, and it was honestly life-changing. And it was at that moment where I really started to dig much deeper into Buddhism and into the practices and the teachings. And at that point, I just considered myself a Buddhist. But even then, it took actually a few more years to come to a temple. I literally lived 10 minutes down the road from my temple now, but I never came here early on in my practice or in my studies. I didn't feel like I needed the Sangha community or environment just yet, and so I kind of stuck to myself with self-study for a few years. And eventually, of course, like most things in life, you come to a stopping point or to a point where you just need the extra help. And so it was at that point that I started to come to the temple, and I believe it was like around the middle of 2012, because I believe in the beginning of 2013 is when I took my 5 precepts, if I remember correctly. But even then, even early on, I always had an attraction toward monastic life. And I really didn't know why. It just felt like it was the right thing to do. But I had, of course, obstacles in the way at the time, and my karma was just not in the correct place for anything to happen yet. So I kind of put it off. And for the longest time, I was convinced myself that, this lifetime isn't the right lifetime for it, right? There was just too many things going on in my life and too many blockages where I just feel like it was never going to happen. So I kind of gave that up and just used the excuse, not in this life, the next life for sure. But as time went on, those blockages kind of simmered down a bit and got easier to overcome or remove. And so eventually, I think it was at the end of or mid 2018, I asked my teacher, Most Honorable Tikfo Kwang, about ordination, and he's like, "Yeah, sure, I'll ordain you if you want." And so we let some time pass by to let it simmer and sink in and make sure that I actually wanted to do that. And so, yeah, some time went by, and then January 2019 is when I took a tonsure and shaved my head, and, the rest is history. But back to the actual questions, why I became a monk. Honestly, again, I still don't know how to explain it in words, but I usually just tell people it was a calling, right? It felt like the right thing to do. There's been quite a few struggles since I've been a monk, personal struggles and challenges, but it still, being a monk makes up for all those challenges, I think. And I know that by being a monk, I'm doing more good as a monk than I would potentially be able to do as a layperson. And I just hope that, one of the biggest stressors is, am I doing anything beneficial? Right? The motto the teacher always says to me is, just be a good monk. Just be a good monk. And sometimes I'm doing things and it makes sense, and it's like, yeah, I know, I hope, I think I'm being a good monk. And other times it'd be like in the most random situations, and he was like, just remember to be a good monk. I'm like, what are you talking about? Are you trying to tell me something telepathically or something? Because I don't get why now in a super random spot that you're telling me to be a good monk. But regardless, I, still take it to heart, and anything and everything I do, I always remind myself, while I'm doing it, to be a good monk, right? Not every day is a perfect day, of course. We're still human. We still, have the challenges of anger and stress and anxiety. But I think one of the main differences, and this is, of course, one of the opportunities that being a monk is beneficial, is when those emotions and feelings arise, we know what to do with them, right? And of course, this is not to say that lay people don't, but most lay people, even though if they superficially know how to deal with anger or what to do with it when it arises, don't actually put it into practice in the moment, right? Typically, would wait until they sit down for meditation to kind of reflect on the day or reflect on the situations that were difficult. But most people won't do that on the spot, right? And so, as monks and nuns, we train to do that on the spot, to face those negative emotions and feelings as they arise in the moment, right? That way they don't linger on, because if you don't face them in the moment when they arise and you allow them to linger and wait to do something about it during meditation or during any other practice, then you're holding on to the anger for that amount of time, right? And that anger could increase. It can get larger. It can boil over, right? It can because it's sitting there, right? It's not exactly dormant. It's sitting there. It's rumbling. It's thinking. It's, thinking of things to persuade you, to make you feel better about yourself if you did something wrong or didn't do something wrong, to yourself, or whatever it may be, right? It's lingering there. It's causing more damage over time the more you hang on to it. And so I think being a monastic has its benefits because, one, you're trained to do things quicker in the moment, and two, you have better opportunities to practice, right? Because as a monastic, as a traditional monastic, right, you leave behind, you emancipate yourself from family and from friends to a degree, and you devote your life to the Dharma, right? So your entire day is revolved around study and practice. Versus if you're a layperson, your entire day is revolved around going to work, taking care of your family, taking care of yourself and your friends, and eating and shopping and doing all these things, and then you dedicate very little time to the practice for most people. And so because of that, because of this small amount of time of devotion, you won't have the full benefits as someone who devotes their entire day to the practice, right? So not to say that monks or nuns are any better than lay people, but it's just we have more time to practice, to study, and to dedicate ourselves to the Dharma. So, I mean, to me, that's one of the benefits and opportunities of being a monk. However, we are also a slightly untraditional temple as well, because we're a small temple. So it's just the three of us. It's me, teacher, and the nun. And for the most part, we are self-supportive. So we don't have a root organization or a board or anything like that kind of funds us. We have to fund ourselves. So with that said, we all also work. We all have day jobs as well as our jobs as monks and nuns. And so that unfortunately adds an additional layer of challenge to the practice, because not only do you have to worry about your practice and your studies and the things around the temple to do and taking care of the congregation and the sangha of the community, but you also now have to worry additionally with your job, right? But we have to do that because that's our only main source of income, is our own income. And so everything that we earn comes back to the temple to support us. And we do that not to, um, you know, showcase any superiority or anything like that, but we're doing that for the benefit of our community, right? Because if we are not going to support ourselves, then who is going to, right? Who is going to support us? And if there's no support, then there's no temple. And if there's no temple, there's no place of practice. So we sacrifice that part of our monastic life to work in order to support the temple and to support the activities and the classes and the services that we provide to the Sangha and to the community. That way the community can flourish. And so, as untraditional as our lifestyle is for monastics, but it's also to the benefit of our community. So we're sacrificing half of our practice in order to help the community practice. And so I'm okay with that, as even though it slows down my progress a little bit, and slows down my studies and realizations. But at the same time, I know that because of that, it's benefiting our community, because in San Antonio, we're the only temple that provides English services and English classes with English chanting and all that, and all of our ceremonies and celebrations are half in Vietnamese and half in English, right? And so we're the only temple that provides that. And so it's really, we know it's a benefit for the community and for the Sangha. And so we are able to accept that sacrifice of giving half ourselves, well, not really half ourselves, but it justifies the sacrifice that we give to work and take some time away from our practice in order to provide something that this community does not have. And so I think the benefits definitely outweighs the cons in this situation. And so that I hope that others will see that as well. And maybe, it'll inspire people to do more for the community, not just for the temple, but do more for the community as a whole, and just be able to do good, right? And I always tell people, it's great when we get donations, because giving a donation for the person that's giving the donation, that's a huge karma brownie point, right? You're building great merit and virtue by making a donation to the temple. But donating to the temple doesn't just have to mean monetary donation, right? It can be a donation of your time, of your efforts, of your practice, right? Just providing yourself, providing your presence during services and classes is a donation to us, right? Because we know that the services and classes are beneficial and they will help someone, right? And so your presence of being here just helps establish the view of being here is helpful. And of course, just during our volunteer days, we have a few volunteer days throughout the year, and so providing your donation to help through that project is also beneficial and helpful. And so there's many ways people can provide donations, but I think I went off topic slightly, but I think I covered the question mostly for the most part. So I'm gonna stop there. That way I can try to keep this short and simple and sweet. It's probably not short or simple, but hopefully it provided some clarity, maybe, and some understanding of the monastic life and the lifestyle here at this temple specifically. So I'll stop there. And of course, if anybody ever has any questions or concerns or anything you'd like me to cover, feel free to email me, email the podcast on whatever platform you're on, or directly to dharmatreeonline@gmail.com, or feel free to visit and like the Facebook page, and you can ask questions either directly through messaging on Facebook or through a comment or whatever other means. I graze through all the social medias and the comments daily. So somewhere I'll see something that you've posted. So, but thank you for joining and listening. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha.